welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the Hampton City Marketing Department. And today we're going to talk about one of the key moments of Hampton's past, one that had national significance, and a new exhibit at the History Museum that's tied to that. Welcome. My guests are Luci Cochran and Mike Cobb.
Robin.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
I am excited about this because it feels local, very local. And a lot of what you do is local, but sometimes like the Civil War exhibits were traveling exhibits and wonderful and important, but the Contraband is us, you know?
It's probably one of the most powerful stories that came out of the Civil War, and what we're so excited about, it really illuminates the national story, but it happened here. Mm-hmm. And for us to kind of explore the lives of these amazing men that were so brave and actually really political activists that made the choice and came to Fort Monroe and really found their freedom. It's an amazing story, and it happened here, and it really changed the war, I think. Of course, we've got a great historian here to tell a little more about that.
Yeah, so Mike, I know the Contraband, and we talk about it a lot, and I hope everybody out there knows exactly what we're talking about, but just in case, you know, they're showing their friends and relatives who are visiting, if you could just recap how that happened and what it is we're talking about.
May 23rd, 1861, 3 men were working in Norfolk on the Confederate fortifications. We were enslaved on the plantation of Charles King Mallory. They make a daring decision to commandeer a boat, a small boat, move it across Hampton Roads in the night. Can you imagine how dangerous that harbor?
Go across Hampton Roads now in the daytime, much less at night with a stolen boat.
They come across Hampton Roads in the dark. They approach Fort Monroe in the early morning. They go to the sentry at the gate. Can you imagine 3 escaped enslaved people going to that massive fortification, and they ask to see the general in command. General Butler, an astute lawyer, comes down and talks to them, and he makes a decision to let them stay. This goes against American law for decades. The fugitive slave law dictated that slaves had to be returned. Butler reasons Virginia's out of the Union, the law no longer applies. He says, you guys stay here, you don't have to go back. You can work for me. He put them to work building a bake oven, and very soon after, as many as 7,000 to 10,000 enslaved people come to Fort Monroe for asylum. Butler declares them contraband, and they declare Fort Monroe as freedom's fortress.
I can't imagine how difficult and daring that was, and mostly for the 3 men, but also for the general. I mean, let's face it.
He got in trouble.
He is sitting there thinking, if I return these slaves, they're going to go build fortifications against me. So it's almost a pragmatic, what is best at the moment, but he's got to find this legal reasoning, and then that begins to build the case and change the war as being, you know, the South succeeding and we're fighting to maintain the Union a little bit more as an anti-slavery movement.
And if you think about it, this happened a month into the war, and it really did change the dynamics that were taking place. And you also think about these people who had been enslaved for generations and now really seized an opportunity. They took action that I think, you know, was ahead of even the great thinkers of the time.
Oh, because what do they think at that point? Their chances are slim to, you know, they would either be returned or, you know, imprisoned or whatever else might happen. I mean, they can't have had but the absolute slimmest of hope that this would be a solution for them, but they took it. I mean, the slimmest of hope was huge, I guess. And worth the risks.
It's such an amazing story and such a personal story. And Mike, our curator, of course, has created this amazing original exhibition. We don't think anyone has ever mounted an exhibition like this in the United States. People certainly tell this story around the country, but this was the first contraband camp. This was the first story where people were really coming and building new lives. And really, for the first time, when they built those contraband cabins, they were free for the first time. And Mike has designed an amazing...
I mean, even the people who came after those 3, it's still a risk. Fort Monroe is pretty much the only place in Virginia that is Union territory. So however you got there, from the Dismal Swamp, escaping from your owners, you had to go through Confederate-held territory, hostile territory, to even get there.
And Robin, they built two settlements, one of which is in the ruins of Hampton after the rebels burned it in August 761. Another camp was near Phoebus, about where the golf course is today. And those two camps were built by the Contrabands, and they built cabins. The cabins were all unique, really interesting places. And what draws me to the cabins, I call them Liberty's cabins, because when a man and a woman went behind the doors and they latched the door, they were on semi-free ground. For the first time in their lives, they had a freedom that they had never known before. They weren't completely free, but they were no longer completely enslaved. So they were moving towards emancipation, and they moved towards freedom by their own self-will. And what we look at this as an exhibit is, who were they? When we think of this era, we think of slaves or contraband, monolithic terms. But what we want to look at is Michael, Luci, their people. And what did they want? They wanted freedom, they wanted education, and they wanted land. So we draw back the veil and look beyond the term of slavery and look at the individuals, young and old, who made up this group that came to Hampton, to Fort Monroe, seeking a better life.
And this was, men, women, and children.
Yes.
And a lot of the men may have found employment or work with the Union Army. So you had a lot of women and children, I would assume,
Sure.
in these camps, sort of day to day.
By 1864, they're mainly women and children and old men, because the Union Army is driving against Richmond and Petersburg. They need people to serve in the Army. By the end of the war, a fourth of the Union Army were African Americans. And also many others who didn't go into the Army or Navy worked on the wharfs, worked on the fortifications. And so many men from here were sent to Petersburg and Richmond to help the war effort. By 1864, Hampton was mainly African American women and children and older men.
Wow. So what am I going to see at this exhibit? I'm pretty excited about
I am
this.
too.
You will, as Mike said, get to see the faces of these people close up, and we really will explore their lives. As a matter of fact, we are building an authentic cabin. The way they lived, we're really showing how they lived, how they built these homes for the first time, and you'll get to see one of those right in the exhibition space.
You certainly will. Also, we're going to do the facade of Fort Monroe, so you get a sense of what it was like to go inside the fort. And we have some other recreated areas that you're going to experience. And we have the wonderful array of images, one of which will greet you as you walk in, with a family or families crowded into a mule-drawn wagon, making their way to Freedom's Fort, Fort Monroe. You'll see these faces. Frederick Douglass tells us that the best depiction of a person of color in that period were not the drawings, because the drawings tend to distort the image.
Right,
It was the
right.
photograph. So we're relying very heavily on the photograph. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see
Those
the
are fairly
people.
rare, aren't they?
We're lucky to
photographs
have a fair number, but in our terms of today, yes. But in the terms of then, we have some nice images.
That's great.
And you're also going to get to see those things that, as Mike said earlier, were really important to them. We're going to really explore how education was such a priority for them. Also having that place that they could come to and call them their own. And then their willingness and want to free themselves through fighting in all of the local battles, and actually all over the country.
Throughout the war, and thousands and thousands of men enlisted, fought very bravely. And if you saw the movie Abraham Lincoln, the movie begins with the Battle of the Crater, fought on June 31st, 1864 at Petersburg. And African Americans are in that battle, and it's a titanic struggle. And so they certainly gave their blood for their freedom.
And you'll see and hear and experience the music and their voices. We found some wonderful anecdotes that they actually expressed themselves. These individuals that were called Contraband, you'll hear their individual stories of coming from as far away as Richmond and other areas and coming to Hampton, whether they were walking and carrying everything they owned or sometimes getting rides. I know there's a wonderful story that Mike's sharing in the exhibition about George Field family, which was a prominent family in the area. But they first came as Contraband to Fort Monroe. And it's a really powerful story. And you'll hear their voices, and you'll hear the music that they created at the time. So it's very multidimensional. And I think you really will get to experience who these people were.
And that's so important. When you tell history, it is supposed to be a story. And I think,
Right.
I've told you guys this before, you get a little bit lost in the battle decisions, and those did have a huge impact and shape lives.
Right.
But you have to at some point get back to the lives. Do you also touch on, and I think this is probably where you got some of your information, but so many of these contraband families stayed and helped build Hampton and became, people whose descendants still live here today and still want to help tell that story. Were you able to find people?
There are
talk to?
advisors, and of course we all know the late Jerry Holland, who founded the Contraband Society, and she was a big help when she was living, and the members of the society are advisors on this, and have been very, very helpful, and they're part of the story. And also, not only do we have living descendants of the people who came here, did you ever wonder where Grant Street, Lincoln Street, Liberty Street, Union Street, where those names came from? They're still there today, modern thoroughfares, but those roads were the main thoroughfares through the Grand Contraband Camp in downtown Hampton. And so those reminders of the Contrabands are still with us.
And so that is essentially where, I don't know if it's not really Old Northampton, it's more like the Northampton.
Right.
The Old Hampton
Yes.
neighborhood, I think, is now.
And there are amazing churches that actually began in that period.
Yes.
There are even businesses. And so we do definitely explore the legacy that the Contraband created in Hampton. It really helped shape our city.
It's amazing. Well, I am looking forward to this exhibit. Give us the dates. I know it's going to open in early October.
October 4th will be opening, and we'll be going through February.
And that's wonderful, because that gives people plenty of time to see it, to bring out-of-town visitors, school kids. Hopefully you can get some schools to come in for field trips and really explore this part of our history.
We're hoping everyone comes. It's an amazing story everyone should know about.
Toward
Great.
Freedom, Hampton History Museum.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Lucy, for coming by and sharing this. And I really look forward to getting a chance to see this exhibit. And I hope all of you will come out and see this as well. It's a great deal. The History Museum is very low cost and a wonderful place to explore our past. Thank you.